Reverend Duvall,
Present.
Dr. Garza,
I know he's there.
Taylor,
We're having a lot of disturbance in the background and we hear somebody typing. It's just, if everybody could unmute until they have to speak, that would be helpful. It's same as last month.
Dr. Garza, Ms. Taylor,
Here,
Dr. McBride,
Here, if you can hear me.
Yes, we can.
Dr. Smith, Dr. Smith, Dr. Smith,
Here.
Ms. Lee,
Here.
Ms. Schmidt,
Here.
Dr. Garza,
Maybe he stepped out or something. He's still on.
I texted him just in case.
Okay. Cool.
Oh,
Thank
he
you.
cannot hear anything, he said.
It's unmuted.
When I couldn't hear, I had to leave out and come back in. So maybe he has to leave and come back.
Looks like he left. We want to wait until he comes back, or
Yeah,
Yeah, I sent him a message to log out and log back in.
And we also
Just to let-
You can go ahead and talk.
Reverend Duvall,
Yes.
I guess we're just waiting on Dr. Garza to come back and else, so we can finish roll call, and then after you call, the minutes, to review the minutes, and then what's the word where
we want to do the all in favor after the second one.
all in favor, I guess, just to be Robert's rules. Good,
Okay.
thank you. Dr. Garza, back on?
finish roll call, Dr. Garza, Dr. Garza,
Okay, we see him. Can you hear us, Dr. Garza? Okay.
Finish.
Yeah, no, just so.
I'm gonna finish roll call, Dr. Garza,
Yep.
So on my agenda, I don't see the reading of the minutes.
Well, should come in after, but we can talk about it whenever you want to, because we have the minutes, so you can bring that up for a vote whenever you want to.
Okay, let's go ahead and start with the opening remarks.
Okay, good morning, everyone. Hope everyone's having a good Friday so far. Just wanted to bring you up to date on a few things. First of all, hopefully, can you hear me? Today's population is 769 inmates. 55 are women and 714 are men. That's the census as of today. One of the other things that we are looking at, excited to report, is the initiatives that were started a year ago on the project of installing 360 view cameras throughout the entire jail to have that accessibility and oversight. That was finally processed, and that will tentatively, the contractors will be on property in August, starting the installation of new touchscreens, new cameras installed in all the housing areas and all the prospective areas. So just wanted to bring the board up to speed. So that's coming to fruition. So we'll keep you updated as we move forward, but wanted to share that news with you as well. The other thing I'd like to share, me and Valerie, because we're all going into the 2021 budget process, and we're going to take a different perspective and do some more joint initiatives going into our budgets, because we both impact each other, is sharing actual input and participation. And this is an opportunity we would like to offer who on the advisory board would like to participate in providing any insight, any input, any guidance, and be part of our submissions. For example, our capital improvement projects, things that impact medical and operations. We're looking, for example, trying to request funding to have an automated accountability, electronic count of all the inmates, every movement, they're in the jail, for example, when they're fed, we can account for when they were fed, when they received their meal, when they go to medical, when they go to programs, so we can have real life tracking and activities on every offender that's in the jail. So that's one of the capital improvement projects, and that's an opportunity for us to see things from a different lens. And other opportunities, we're looking at establishing additional padded cells. This jail was designed many years ago, and we only have one padded cell. And we identified a few areas where we can use that as an additional resource with the population that we often have to manage. So, and there's other ideas. So I want to throw that out there. We're both looking for some participation, if possible, from the board on that subcommittee for the 2021 budget. And we're going to follow up with an email with all these different committees to see if some of y'all would consider being part of it, and we can communicate by Zoom. And WebEx, we can't use Zoom, so we can communicate that way, so it's going to be convenient for everyone. Another thing we started doing is recently all of you received our draft revisions to policies, and we want to establish a uniform standing committee and representation from the advisory board as we're looking at these policies, both corrections medicine and the Department of Justice Services, to revise and look at them every year. It's required, so we can look at some things from another perspective and look at getting input from the advisory board as well. Another area we wanted to move forward with, Trisha's with us today. In the next few weeks, we're going to give more accessibility to what the new website design will be. I shared that last night with Dr. Reverend Duval, some information that other agencies are putting out there, and I think it's a good guide. And I'd like to see if one or two of you will be part of that committee to help us shape what information, what's critical. And it comes at a perfect time. We are in the process of onboarding our first ever statistician. We partnered with the MacArthur Grant. They are funding a part-time statistician that's going to help us really identify and quantify data. And that person will be sort of key in making sure all the information that we move forward is quantified and statistically sound. The other piece of it was the joint with anything to do with when we talk about the ERP process. So also, I'll let Valerie probably want to, but also as we move forward with other RFP projects or assignments, there is an opportunity here for us before we actually go into the button and it goes to the procurement process, the shaping of RFP language, what we like to see in services in the future. And we'd like to reach out to the advisory board members and also be part of that And then this way you can help shape what you feel helping us would be a good fit for whatever services. And that's both for corrections, medicine, and the Department of Justice Services as well. And, a lot going on. And the other thing is, I think this morning, every one of you received an email. We're in the process of finalizing the 2019 annual report. And this year, we're taking a different approach. Corrections medicine is going to have a big presence. And it's important that we feature the advisory board that has not been there before. And I think it's important if we can get a headshot from each of you. And I'm going to have a draft write-up so we can engage you, because that will also be online as well. We're going to feature our annual report electronically online for the public to view as well. And we'll give you a draft so you can also look at it and give us feedback on what areas we can shape and sort of improve on this first digital annual report. And bear with me. Oh, I think moving forward, me and Valerie, when she does her M&M, which is basically an actual process, which is really well, it's known in the medical field, where we basically look at what have we learned from circumstances, how can we improve. I will by next week be sending all the board members. We're sort of going to mirror what Valerie does from her M&M report and put some incidents, some information from the operations side, so that when we send out our messaging on M&M, we might call ours an operational best practice, send that out so you can also be abreast on mirroring issues and challenges, because challenges she faced, we face also. So that's going to be new in the next coming week. That's going to be sent to you in a draft form as well. So, and on the staffing, if I can report on that, Reverend, we are onboarding 14 cadets August 3rd. It's a Monday, and that is going to put us at that time with 11 vacancies. So we have been very fortunate, and we have about another 18 in the final stages. So we look at onboarding the remaining 11 vacancies for corrections officers in the first week of September.
Quick question.
Yes, sir.
What do you foresee as the timeline when you're going to start these subcommittees?
Well, I'd like to start the subcommittees as early as next week, if that's possible, especially with the budgets. We're going through our budget exercise for the current budget, looking at areas we can trim because of shortfalls. But I'd like to send something out. I will send out this afternoon on the fiscal budget, because if we can meet like maybe next Tuesday or Wednesday, the sooner the better, so that we can start formulating that so we have enough time to get it in for the 21 budget.
So hopefully in a timely manner that you can get this email, as you mentioned, to all the board members so they can look at their schedules to see if they're going to be available as early as next week.
Yes, sir. Penny will be putting that out when we get done with this meeting, sir.
Okay. When you mention the manpower, I applaud you for, closing the gap, since we know it's been as high as 20 and 25 officers. How does that equate to your white shirts and promotions? Are you going to have some lateral movements, and will that affect then how many more correctional officers you'll need to backfill if you promote up?
Reverend, that would not affect, because at this point there's no anticipated promotions at all. It's one sergeant, he's retiring, but that's already, we're going to promote a sergeant actually August 2nd, but that's already included, that one officer. And I did applaud the recruitment team, Captain Jones and some of the members, because we were as high as 59 at one point in 2019. So they have made a lot of concerted efforts, and with county HR to process applicants. So we've been fortunate. We have really been instituting a lot of incentives to get that done.
Okay. I'd like to open it up to any advisory board members for questions on the remarks from the director. Dr. McBride, Twyla, anybody have any questions for the director about his comments? Dr. Garza?
This is Spring. Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Do you have like when you send some stuff out for these different subcommittees, and I think this is really great to get like help on some of these additional pieces. Will you prioritize a couple of deadlines? Like which are the things that are coming up the fastest? Like I know my budget is due. So if there's something budgetary like along those lines that you need help with, that may be like highlight it as a more the most pressing need, just to help us so because we could be interested in more than one.
And that's a great suggestion, and when we send this out, it's gonna be me and Valerie, since we mirror some of the same practices, so we'll put deadlines and prioritize. I think we all know the 2021 budget will be the first thing. So, great suggestion.
Okay, without any other comments, anybody else?
Yeah.
Go ahead, please.
On the going back to the beginning, Director, on the stats, can we have a little more detail? We have asked for more detail, and I think you've given us more detail in the past about like how many of those current residents are pretrial. I mean, that would be that's really helpful to me because I know, and I think I also asked a couple months ago that you give us some sense of how that movement has happened over the last 6 months, because I think we've seen a real decrease in the last year, certainly, but in the last 6 months, it'd be nice to see how or if that pretrial release is going.
What we can do, Ms. Taylor, is because we've seen a trend like day before yesterday, we were as high as 802 inmates. So what we can do, because we're doing it for the budget, and when I send that out today, I'll send you the trends for the last 6 to 8 months, so you'll see the population. And in there, we'll identify all those in pretrial and post-trial as well.
That'd be helpful, because I think what I'm not sure we appreciate is the huge drop that, when I was walking into the jail every Wednesday morning 2 years ago, we were always over 1,000 inmates. So, I mean, I think it's helpful to look and see what's happened in that period of time and to link it to practices.
We will.
Okay, and along with what Mary just said, what about the inmates when we had a concern of how long? Do we have an idea of what our population is in terms of if they've been there over a year and a half, close to 2 years?
And when we put that, we'll add another spreadsheet that will show. And these are the things that I think we need to also consider putting on the website, because we're not identifying it. These are actual data points that the statistician is going to really be very helpful to draw that data and provide it as often as we need it. So that will be also attached, because it's good to know how long we'll know the average length of stay. So that correlates to the judicial system as a whole. Yes, sir.
Okay.
One more thing, Phil. On the new website, I mentioned before in an email, I think to you, Director, but I'm not sure, maybe it was to Tricia, that the website is used by the community, and I appreciate you inviting some of us to be involved in input, but I think it would be really helpful if we are going to be involved in giving some feedback, that we have some way of gathering information from the community who actually use the Justice Services website. And I mean, I would like to hear, what do they think should be, higher priority? I mean, where do they think the concerns tab should be placed so that everybody can see it? And, and just because, we have some good ideas usually, but we aren't the community, but I think we try to represent the community.
Well, Ms. Taylor, what we can do, and I've seen this done every hold and establishing the website, we can put something flashing that says any suggestions that anyone would share to maybe navigate the website more easily, because they'll use it much more than people we can put that in there, because it's about constant improvements, because sometimes you just got to move things around to make it more accessible to the public. But we
Yeah,
can put that in
I
the-
appreciate that because you know, we added the concerns tab so that members of the community could express their concerns about either the medical or the regular corrections side relating to their family members incarcerated. But it's placed, as you know, on the old website at the very bottom of all the policies and procedures. Like, I'm pretty savvy about websites, but I didn't roll down until somebody told me where it was. So it's certainly not front and center. And I think very few community members think that there is a way to express their concerns. So maybe highlighting that in some other way too. Thank you.
And another thing, Ms. Taylor, and to the board, because I was talking to a visitor yesterday and they were complimenting on the front staff, the front desk staff. And they say, how do I give kudos to the staff? We're gonna also put a link there for even positive comments, you know, because that's also encouraging to also know from a customer service perspective, what are some of the good things we're doing? So we're gonna also put that in there for positive feedback. We put that link also so people can also share the positive experience they have with that.
And why you have to have a positive feedback link and a regular feedback link, because feedback and comments are the same. When you read them, you'll know. So is it that you all gonna go directly to the positive more, or what? I don't see why it has to be separated.
And we could probably put a caption in there, any improvements or any concerns, or we could just put one and then sort of give a little description on what they can communicate that, sort of. But that's something we can formulate. Thank you, Ms. Lee.
Yes, Dr. Garza.
Yeah, so just a couple of comments for the director. So
Give it to museum. You did that? Dr. Garza?
Phil, could you talk, or Alex, could you talk loud? You're really soft.
oh, sorry, I'm having a problem with my Bluetooth today, so I apologize. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, it's that your mic is really not picking up.
Volume's not.
Okay, that's all right. So continue on, and I'm going to try and switch over to a different. Okay.
Oh, I can hear you.
Okay. Any more comments relative to this part of the agenda? If not, I'd like to go ahead and move to the role of the advisory board and duties during the investigation.
Steve, did you see that? He's there, right? Steve? Are we frozen?
I see it.
Where's Steve unmuted?
I'm here, Director. How can I help?
Well, the question is asking, the Reverend is asking about the advisory role and duties during the investigation.
Well, I mean, I think what the board, Reverend, are you asking for some kind of legal advice or legal interpretation of what the role of the board would be?
Is there a role? It's on our agenda. Is there a role for this advisory board during these investigations?
Well, Reverend, I'm not one to give legal advice in a public meeting. I'm more than happy to discuss any appropriate topic after the meeting with you or with any member of the board individually. Or if you think that this would be more proper during a closed session, because it's appropriate for within the Sunshine Law, I'm happy to do that too. But I'm not going to give legal advice. I never have given legal advice in a public session.
Okay.
I'm
Yeah,
happy-
go ahead. Go ahead, Mary.
I asked for it to be put on, but only because it had been a general topic of conversation among the board for the whole last year. This is our first anniversary meeting. We've been together for a year, and it was a question at our very first meeting. I'm sorry, there's the dog barking in the background. And it's been a question all the way through, and I think it's something that we've struggled with moving in and out. So I would like to hear, I mean, I didn't expect to ask for a legal opinion during this meeting because I know that would throw us into closed session, and you know how I feel about that. What I'm really interested in is what the rest of the board members thought they were signing up for, or if they've done any evaluation. I mean, if you look at the charter language, it's extremely broad. And I think that when we all first signed up, I think we had an idea that there was going to be a wider role for us in terms of community input, especially since we came in right after the deaths. And I would just point out also that the other thing that was identified was that places on the board were not filled, and the board had not been meeting in any significant way. And that was not just the case with our board, but with quite a few other boards. And to his credit, I think the county executive then asked for a review and an audit of all the boards and commissions. And so I will quote from that document that came out of that audit on August 2019, where it said boards and commissions are designed to give citizens a voice in their government and allow citizens to influence decisions that shape the quality of life for the residents of St. Louis County. Participation on a board or commission is one of the most effective steps citizens may take in becoming an active voice in their government. And then I did a little more research. There is something called the Municipal Research and Services Center on local government citizen advisory boards, encourages boards such as ours to resist political, personal, and special interest pressures, to be independent, impartial, and responsible to the people. So with that kind of as a backdrop, I would like to invite other members of the board to talk about whether or not we have, I question whether I have been an effective board member for change in the community. I know I've been irritating, and I know I've been vocal, and I know I care a lot, but whether or not I've been an effective advocate for change is concerns me, because none of us, I look at this board as an unbelievably I have respect for every single one of you, and everybody is competent in their own areas, and everybody has special professional expertise to bring to the table that I think has gone missing, has not been put to use. So I would open it up to any member of the board who wants to talk about the role and specifically about the investigations. To say that we have no role in investigations, or to try to minimize our role in investigations, is baffling to me, since we were brought in with a promise of transparency, and we were brought in right after 5 men died.
So I'd like to start my comments by asking a question. Mr. Capizzi, are you there?
I am, Reverend.
Okay. Are you familiar with our advisory board bylaws?
Yes, Reverend. I believe they're published as well on the website.
That is correct. And they were adopted on September 27th, 2019. Article 3 of our bylaws state the duty of the advisory board as set forth in section 4.420 of the charter is to advise the director of the Department of Justice Services. More importantly, I want to highlight these words: relative to the functions and affairs of the department. So I just wanted to use that as a segue as to what Mary is asking. How are we advising relative to the functions and affairs of the department when we are only given information after things have happened, and then we're denied access for being able to discuss them? And I'm not talking about in a legal way, because as we go further in this meeting, we're going to ask to have a conversation. We're not infringing upon HIPAA. We're not infringing upon personnel records. as an advisory board, there has to be transparency, and I want to know, where does the transparency start? Not where does it, no, where does it end? Because the transparency of going in closed session is not transparency. We should have open discussions about some of this, and that's why when Mary asked, what is our role and duties during the investigation? Can somebody, other than you, Mr. Capizzi, Mr. Director, can you give us some clarity as to what you're expecting or anticipating, what our roles are during the functions relative to the affairs of the department? So I think I'm asking Mr. Benasco now.
The Reverend Duval, to that response from an operational review, we're gonna continue to do moving forward jointly when we have incidents or things that might have had happen. We will jointly get on a call and talk to each of the board members and give you whatever information we can at that time of what might occur, so you're getting it on the front end. And then when all the investigations are done and after we're able to see where information is public record, we're going to get ahead of that, myself and Valerie jointly, from corrections medicine and an operation perspective, on what are the improvements in the process that we need to make as a result of what might have happened. So from an operational perspective for both of us, giving some information on the front end so you're all aware without compromising anything. And
So am I to take that as we'll be receiving going forward, we'll receive briefings prior to the Post-Dispatch writing about what goes on in that jail? I guess what I'm asking is there any participative role of this board when getting these briefings?
when I say participative, I think it's important that, you ask questions as well, and we'll be able to share what we can at that time, the board members. And with that being said, and understanding that often all news media, they post stuff, but we don't even know what they're posting. So sometimes we find out, we find out after the fact, but just moving forward, let's do it jointly, because there might be more of a medical corrections view on what might have happened. It might be an operational view. I mean, it can weigh more heavy on either of us. So if we do it jointly, we can answer any questions that we can at the same time without having to do multiple calls and having one
Reverend
side.
Duval,
Yes, go ahead, Twyla. Thank you, Mr. Director. Go ahead, Twyla.
I'm sorry, Director. My concern or my thoughts about being on the board, I feel as if we come or participate in these meetings once a month and we're just told information. And we really have no way of ensuring or knowing if we're giving accurate or correct information. And, there has been a breach of trust, because we've learning of incidents through the media, and we're right, whatever it is. So my concern is, how do we move this from being more like feeling like a dog and pony show? So how do we change this to where we are actually involved and we know, we can say, oh yes, the director and everything is going on just as they're saying? Because in the past or prior to last couple of weeks, we probably could have said that, but as we know, that's untrue. So I don't want to feel like I'm wasting my time, because to come and just listen to you and this is what it is, how do we know you're telling the truth?
Well, ma'am, to go back to what I mentioned earlier, getting as much information on the front end jointly to each of the board members is one of the things we both feel like that's an improvement in the process. And especially when an ongoing investigation, there's probably certain things we can't share, but when it's all done, it's basically what we can't share, because at that time, once legal and everyone looks at it, there's also always an opportunity from any experience, and we know in the profession, what are the things we've done, improvements have to be made, or if there was any concerns that the process that we had in place wasn't followed.
So I'm not really speaking directly to investigations. I'm talking about the everyday operations of how everything is going on and what you say, your policies and procedures. How do we know what is actually the policy and procedure for intake, for to get to the infirmary? Those are the things I want to know. How are we to know that your policies and procedures are being implemented and followed? Because especially the ones that you update and change. When do we ever get to inspect it? When do we ever get a walkthrough to see what actually goes on in the Justice Center? That is what I thought I signed up for, because I can come to a meeting, or you can come to my meeting and I can tell you anything. I can make numbers say what they want them to say, but how do we know it's factual?
Well, Ms. Lee, I know I personally haven't met you, but I know earlier before COVID, we were invited to count, several of the board members were able to come. We walked the entire jail, and you're all very welcome. I talked to Reverend Duvall that it'd be great for y'all to walk through. The policies are on the website, and moving forward, creating the subcommittee for all policy reviews. I think that's going to be very helpful, because you'll see what is in place, and everyone who's on the committee, to include advisory board, can give input, because you see it from a different lens. And the doors are always open. We welcome any of the advisory board members to see. I mean, we've done a great job jointly on Covert. It'd be great for you to actually see some of the initiatives we've made through Covert. So the doors are open, and you're right. The policies are out there. You can read them, and you're very familiar. And when you come, you can actually see if we're actually practicing policy. And constructive criticism is always an opportunity to improve. And I'm very visible in the jail, but another set of eyes, another opportunity from advisory members to see what we can improve is always welcome, man.
Yes, and to be honest, you did reach out to me, and I did schedule a time, and it was canceled due to COVID. So I don't want it to be understood or heard from anyone else on this call that I just didn't respond or did not show up to meet with
I
you.
clarify, Ms. Lee, it was a few members that just at the trust COVID came. So, but we're still able to come with, as long as you, and the jail is very confident, safe, as long as you have your face here, you can come and join, and we have a lot of social distancing. So we welcome that. And we can work out, and I can have Penny send an invite and see when it works for each of your schedules, if you'd like to come out and visit us.
Reverend Duvall, oh, I'm sorry. Reverend Duvall.
Yes, sir. Dr. McBride, please.
So, this discussion is it seems to be about the role of the board, and it seems like we've been talking about this for better part of a year. And I'm still confused about the borders of the role of the board. And when the question was asked to start this agenda item, it was said we couldn't talk about it in the open meeting. It had to be in a closed meeting, and we get into this yin and yang and about what we can talk about in an open meeting, what we can talk about at a closed meeting. And this is a public body, and I think the public sort of has a right to hear some of these things. And there was a story that appeared in the Post-Dispatch this morning, that I think people want to know about. And frankly, one of the things that gets a bit frustrating about this board is I read things in the Post-Dispatch that I never hear about first as a board. That's frustrating. And that's been happening for the better part of a year. And so I still am not clear about the role of the board, and I don't, and we've had long protracted discussions about this, and it's very hard to be a board member if I don't even know why I'm here and what my role is supposed to be. And I think that's a public discussion, not a closed meeting discussion. And I think, I thought I was being appointed to this board to have a public role. And I think, as Twyla just articulated quite well, we have a role as public board members to make comments about policies and procedures. We were brought on this board because of a series of deaths that happened in the jail that concern the community, and now there's some other concerns that have been brought forward that I think we need to discuss. We don't need to get into details about who did what, when, where, the person's name, whatever. That's an investigation, but we need to talk about policies and procedures, I think. And, if we're not going to talk about those sort of things, I'm not really sure why I'm here. I'm a pretty busy person. So anyways, that's sort of my comments.
Reverend, if I might.
Yes, please, Frank.
So I agree here in that in this role, and I think the role discussion is a public discussion. It's only when we ask for like the legal advice more specifically, or when we get into the topics of the like a very specific investigation, that we end up in this sort of constant round of pieces about a closure. And I think that we have talked about the need to dive into process to Mary's point, to think about how this affects the public, how this affects inmates, how this affects the feeling of what we're doing and the culture of what we're doing. But we also have to hold ourselves to those guidelines. If we focus on process and procedures, then our meetings and our comments and our communications have to be focused on process and procedures and not like the details of an investigation, because every time we get into the details of an investigation, we will be in hyper legal territory that is more controlled by a wide variety of other laws. I think if we have policy and procedure discussions about, and they can certainly be related to the incidents that we've seen, and they should be, but all of the policy and procedure discussion, unless we have to ask a hyper legal question for specific advice from Mr. Capizzi, then we should be able to conduct the entire piece of that in open public forums.
And if I could add to that, Spring, standing up the subcommittee review of policies, like moving forward, those are the things that when we look at policies that are coming up for the annual review, what are the recommended changes and the reasons why? There's a lot of expertise on the board from different aspects, and that you can also learn the culture and some of the things we have in place for both corrections medicine and operations. So I agree with you. I think this is a great opportunity, standing up the policy review, which has not been stood up. We put policies out there, but there wasn't a mechanism to involve the board at the time to be part of the revision parts.
Phil?
Yes, please.
So, Mary, go ahead. I
No,
apologize.
no, please go ahead.
Thank you, Mary. I would say from my perspective, I would appreciate that as well, because one of the things that we're constantly challenged with is walking that line to address questions from whomever, but knowing that there may be a variance in what that person's perception of a scenario might be and what we might know to be based on the documentation, the information that my team, for example, may have at any point of investigating an issue. And I think it's very difficult to find that balance of language to help whomever it is that's asking about that to have some kind of confidence, but yet understand that there's still a lot of information that can't be discussed.
Oh, yeah.
So, I mean, I would welcome to just input on what does that language look like when we merge into some scenario where a perception that we're hearing does vary from what we know at the time. What does that language look like that, for example, I can respond to you or to whomever else may be asking this to make that possibility of that variance aware to people without discussing the details that I can't yet discuss. Does that make sense?
But, oh, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Spring, respond. I think you were.
So I want to say though that I don't want to just discuss like the language of a policy. I think that's important because I think that sets, like it does set your baseline, and I think we can talk about that language. But to Twyla's point and others, and we have talked about this with patient safety and other pieces of that, when there are breaks in policy, and you have to talk about the culture of what supports the policy. And so I would also want to talk about not necessarily an investigation, but a break in the policy or how to expand the culture so that you know the policies aren't just written but followed, and there's culture building around that. I would really like to have this board talk about that because of the experience of the board, and particularly for some of the access to the community from members of the board, to give that cultural perception for the community's voice in whether a procedure is followed.
And Mary, I know you were saying something, Mary, but one thing
I really do.
Okay, go ahead, Mary.
You know, I've been around this policy and procedure world my whole life since 1974 in hospitals and healthcare. Dr. Garza, Tim, you and all of you guys know how I feel about policies and procedures. I don't know who was it who said culture eats policy and procedure every time. And so I don't think we're talking about getting the right words around policies and procedures. I mean, holy Moses, we're talking about culture here, and we're not talking about the culture in the community outside the jail. We're talking about the culture in the community inside the jail. And we're talking about trust. And I think trust has probably been broken on both sides at different times for different reasons. And as to the role of the board, you know, I don't think we ought to be asking right now anymore the county counselor for legal advice on the role of the board, because we've done that before, and we're now on our third county counselor. And no offense to you, Steve, at all, you're just the third person sitting in the chair. I think we have seen over this year attempts, and I don't know if they came from the director or if they came from the county counselor, but attempts to clip our wings, attempts to silence us, attempts to minimize our role. Very clearly, I'm not the only, it would only be paranoid if it wasn't true. Oh, thank you, Peter Drucker. Thank you, whoever told me that. But this is about culture. So you can change all the policies and procedures you want to. You can send, bless your heart, Valerie, for sending the new policies on use of force and stuff in the medical. I get that. But I also recognize it as a symptom, because I've worked in big, complex medical places. My only job was looking at breaks in policy. My only job was looking at gaps in culture and practice where patients were hurt and patients died. And I'm very familiar with the behavior that where someone or come and very, very quickly say, we've changed this already, we've changed this already, we've changed this. These are all the new things we're doing. And frankly, it's always an attempt, and I say this with all due respect, because I think everybody who isn't trained in process improvement does this. It's always an attempt to hold people back, to say, hey, we've got this covered, we're on this, we maybe have had a change of mind, and we're doing new things, so you can relax. And I'm just here to tell you that I'm just not relaxing. When I read the thing in the paper this morning, and I heard the press conference last week, and that's where I got all my information, I would just offer to you that what you guys are grappling with has been the way to approach events, and Valerie knows this, and Alex knows this, the way to approach events, deaths, serious injury, or anything I would say these use of force, is with a consistent process that works. The process of looking at those things doesn't change. I feel like we have a very haphazard reaction to all of these events. And that I would also offer, I have said this before, I'm saying it again, the accrediting body that accredits the Juvenile Justice Center, which is not the accrediting body that accredits the Adult Justice Center, has a whole section on patient safety, and they have adopted the AHRQ, Alex, guidelines for for following up on any events that happen that give you concern. And those are things that go to internal affairs. Those are things that go to an M. Those are things, you don't have to create an M&M for correction stuff. You have a process improvement policy called, debriefings and root cause analysis. And what it provides, I know I'm going on and on, what it provides is a neutral framework where you don't respond to this one because you don't like this person or this other person is in a position who happens to be popular or unpopular. The neutral framework approaches the event. And then our job is to make sure that that neutral framework is operating, that it's not influenced by conflicts of interest, that it's not influenced by personnel decisions. But I just heard 20 minutes from wonderful people struggling with how to look at these events and how to give us communication. This has all been done before. And it's been done in the nuclear reactor industry in National Transportation Safety Board and medical folks for 25 years. So we don't need to reinvent the wheel, but that neutral structure provides trust, which I think we are lacking. And it provides confidence to the community that things are not being swept under the rug, and that the director always knows right away when things happen, and the board knows as quickly, and it gives a framework for how you can share and what to share. Valerie, I'm sorry. I know I went on, but I just had to say it because I really think if we are struggling anywhere with how to go about these things, we should stop.
Okay, I'd like the director to make his comments, and then we're going to move to the next agenda item. Go ahead, Mr. Benasco.
And I'd like to respond to that. Mary Taylor, you bring up some excellent points, and you're right. Any organization has its culture, and in one of the recent incidents, we realized there were some systems in place that we needed to address, and that's why moving forward, myself and the deputy director within 15 minutes are notified on any incident that might be occurring. So, and Valerie's is notified as well. So that is something that we wanted to address because that's a new practice in our culture. And I think it's important that my office, as well as the deputy director's office, is aware of that. So I can share that immediately, and me and Valerie are in sync on what's occurring both for corrections, medicine, and operations. So that's like one of the major revisions in the current practice that we're pushing forward. Valerie?
15 minutes is a long time.
We said 15, but we've been getting it as soon as 5 minutes. So
Okay, Valerie, go ahead. Valerie, finish your comments. I'd like to go to the next item.
What I was going to open for discussion at whatever point is appropriate is to hear thoughts on what kind of language is meaningful to you all as the board to hear after these processes are conducted internally. So, for example, with the M&M reviews that we report on from the medical side, we go through and create a formal report with the root causes, the recommendations for response actions, and the timelines that those were completed by. There is opportunity, or what I'm hearing from the concerns that were just voiced, is that there may be opportunity to share more of that type of information on an incident by incident basis. I think I'd like to explore that more from you all to understand what would be meaningful.
Phil, before you go on, I think it would be really effective if we decide what's the action item coming out of this agenda. We just talked for a long time about it, and I feel like we do that over and over without resolving anything. And is there any action item that any of you can think of that is coming out of this discussion, this agenda item?
Mr. Benasco, correct me if I'm wrong. I think he listed some of the things in his opening comments that can capture what the action items are relative to what he knows is coming in the future. Am I correct to say that, Mr.
Yes.
Benasco?
I think it's, and when you say an action item, Mary, I'm familiar, but what would we actually put this under? And my, in thinking broadly is, effective and well, information gathering, communication. We can call it what we need to from an action item, but it's getting information out, getting all the board members more involved in policy and practice. As we see improvements and need improvements, and sharing what we learn from every from the corrections.
And that's effective now, correct?
Yes, sir.
Reverend Duvall, can I, may I? So
If it's short, because
short.
we have some other things to cover.
From an action item perspective, I'd like to get that to be a bit more specific, so that there will be a process and procedure for events that will be documented. The documentation will be sent to the board within a certain amount of time, or brought up as a specific agenda item at the next meeting in order to review what those policy process changes or breaks or procedures, and if we follow like one of those things. So I would like a recommendation for Valerie and Raul to present us with the steps that you've outlined in your verbal comments and with feedback from what we've just discussed, to say this will be the review process, this will be the document that follows it, this will be how it will be communicated to the board, and in what time frame, and this will be the board's opportunity to review and engage, or which other steps in the process, and how that feeds back into the new policy or process or procedure, or to talk about the culture, and that will be in the next board meeting. Can we line that out?
Somebody else was going to talk? Dr. Garza? Was somebody else going to speak? Okay.
Yeah, I just wanted to make a couple of comments, Director. I apologize for my earlier microphone malfunction. So I think in just listening to everybody, my impression is the challenge that we're having is there's not a very well-defined structure process for how things are either worked on or communicated, or how we go about solution finding. And so I think that really is fundamentally what you need to work on at that system. So all these conversations that we're having about subcommittees and data sharing and things like that, but to me, it all comes back to that's because there's not a well-defined structure and process in place. So, for instance, with these subcommittees, typically a subcommittee of a board will have a distinct charge, will have members, it'll get its roles and responsibilities, all of these things. There's a very well laid out chart that says this is what is going on with a committee and a subcommittee. And so that's the kind of structure that I'm looking for. And I think what that does is it brings a sense of order, but it also brings transparency, and it brings confidence that everybody understands what is going on, that this is how things are going to operate, and then you can track things going through the system. So I think that's really what I'm looking for, is a very organized structure and process on how things are going to work. And then a lot of, I think, this confusion and angst and conflict will go to the wayside if people have an understanding of this is how the system works. So those are just my comments.
And Dr. Garza, great points. And each of these committees have to have a charge, so everyone who's involved knows what the expectation, because everyone has sort of a different mission. So that those will be delineated, and what the charges of those who, and that also will give every board member the deciding opportunity which one they would like to choose. But we'll make sure they have charges.
So, Mary, would you be willing to phrase a motion relative to the comments that Spring made, so we can get a clear understanding as to what it is we want to do going forward?
Why doesn't Spring frame her own motion?
Yeah, I move that we request a document for the process pieces of this level of review, and to Alex's point, the subcommittee structure that you're looking for, what the timeline will be, and what the charge will be for each of those pieces. When the structure of how you will communicate like these changes and get input from the board and communicate back to the board, and what that cycle will look like. Let's focus on a cycle structure document, and I move that we request that, and use that as the opportunity for further discussion to narrow this subject down and get it like in process.
Yes, sir. I'll second.
Could I have a little bit of discussion about this, Reverend Duvall?
Absolutely, Dr. McBride.
I just want to be sure that this is clear, that it's not just about the committee, the subcommittee structure we're talking about, because I heard Spring Smith's conversation that this was about incident reporting, such as the deaths, such as the recent incidents, that this would be about reporting back to the board in a timely fashion, that there would be policies and procedures. You're nodding your head. So I want to reflect it in minutes that this would be about, that there would be policies and procedures and timely reporting of that. So, because that's my concern is, that we've had these 5 deaths and recent incidents and we haven't, that's what I'm looking for. So I'm seeing you're nodding your head, and I'm in agreement, which means that I would vote for this. So.
Thank you, Dr. McBride. So did you catch, Trish or Penny, that I second Spring's motion?
I did. Can we get it all in favor?
I'd like to do a roll call, please.
Reverend Duvall,
Yes.
Dr. Garza,
Yes.
Ms. Taylor,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes.
Dr. Smith,
Yes.
Ms. Lee.
Yes, did you say Miss Lee?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
Phil, I asked for an agenda item to be put on related to the most recent allegations of use of force onto the agenda. And I was told that it would be included in this first agenda item. I'm sorry to tell you all that, but that's what I was told, that update would be included in this first agenda item. So and my expectation, I will say this ahead of time, is I don't at this point, I don't care about names and I don't care about the details of it. What I'm interested in is when we knew what we knew, and then I'm concerned also because of the newspaper this morning of whether or not whether we know that there were attempts to stifle the communication and bring it up. I'm sorry, Jeff, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, the piece about the article this morning and that was most troubling to me was the ex post facto changes made to the incident reports,
Okay.
and whether or not that indeed happened, and if it did, if that's inconsistent with established policies and procedures.
Okay, Mary and Jeff, I'd like to bring that in on the next item, which would be 5. I'd like to go over the grievance procedures for the Justice Services staff real quick, if you don't mind.
That's fine with me.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, is that okay?
Reverend,
Yes.
did we finish the first motion? We got it? Okay, good. Okay, we good.
Yes.
Okay, good.
So Director, I'd like for you real quick to cover the grievance procedure for Justice Services staff.
Well, the grievance procedures for Justice Services staff is a process that's civil service driven. So, I mean, at the end of the day, when a staff member has a grievance concerning any matter, they try to address it with their immediate supervisor. If not, now we have a human resource coordinator in place now. We established that. So moving forward, it would be her role to try to, if they're not able to address it with the immediate supervisor, go to her role, then it can come to my role, and the director of administration is over HR. And then also keep in mind, they can always go to county HR. Eventually, all grievances can go to county HR. It's pretty much spelled out in civil service. That's how the role is, Reverend.
Okay, so you just mentioned that you have, how long has this HR associate been in your building?
She's only got in place like 2 weeks ago, sir. It's a big-
Okay, has that been, how has that been disseminated throughout the building that she's in your building?
Well, she has put that, it was announced when she was in it, and this goes back to a change in the culture, because we still find that folks will take different avenues. So we're continuing to communicate that we have someone who's part of our team who's now over human resources. And it can address so many things because we're dealing with payroll challenges and different aspects of benefits. And because now we have someone in place and we don't always have to go across the street, we're able to resolve a lot of things locally. And sometimes it's easy as a change of address. So we've communicated that to all the justice staff. And actually she comes back next week. She's been out on a medical situation, but she will put it out again. And we'll we've met with the shift commanders, the managers. This person's in a new role and is helping facilitate human resources. So it gives the staff member another opportunity. Now, if perhaps the conflict is with the immediate supervisor, they can go directly to her, and then also utilizing her in different aspects when we look at different processes as far as advancement opportunities, that I'm now bringing her into it as an independent person to sort of be part of that process as well.
Last month, there was a discussion about whistleblower protection. Can you find out, Mr. Director, do your employees, is there some means of a whistleblower protection in the event that your employees do not feel comfortable going through the civil service rules or going through the HR? Find out if there's a whistleblower protection. That's, yes.
I think there is one, Dr. Page, I think earlier. Mary, go ahead. Go ahead, Mary.
So I remember I brought this up, so I did follow through with Steve during the month and have done some research on my own. You know, the current whistleblower protection in the county that was passed a year ago is very narrow in scope and only provides for whistleblowers related to procurement and financial mishandling.
Correct.
So this is not, and then Steve pointed out to me that there is a state whistleblower protection. It's really broad, and I don't think it's particularly helpful. I think I have mentioned this to my local council member and suggested that maybe we, as a county, try to broaden the whistleblower protection, because I go back to culture again. If we believe there's a culture within the jail where people do not feel free, or maybe they have gone up the ladder in the past, even before you've come, Mr. Director, but if they have tried to use the mechanisms that are provided in the grievance policy, which I have read, and have found it not to be helpful, and in fact, maybe to be harmful, that the confidentiality that is implied in such a mechanism was not there. So I think, you know, we come to this with a framework that there is perhaps an unhealthy culture in some places in the jail, and that in order to move forward, we can't just say, here's the policy, use it, because you have an underlying culture that says it hasn't been safe to do so in the past for some people. So that's, you know, it's one of the reasons why I brought it up, and one of the reasons why I thought it might be helpful for all county staff, no matter where they work, to have an opportunity, if they have used the mechanisms implied and that haven't worked, to use the whistleblower ordinance in order to do that. But that's just my thoughts.
I'd like to make a recommendation, Director, that it be communicated to your staff and to the workers in the jail that they're free to contact this advisory board with their issues.
Noted.
Any more comments on the grievance procedures or discussion? If not, we'll move to item number 5. Item number 5, advisory board access to incident reports and use of force reports. So now I'd like Mary and Jeff, if you would, please feel free to finish your comments that you made earlier.
Go ahead, Mary.
Oh, after you, Jeff, I've had my fair share. Go ahead.
Well, so I mean, I guess my first broader question is where, I guess I have 3 parts here, kind of going on the fly. But my first question is, where would investigations such as the one detailed in this morning's article fit into the prior resolution, you know, that we just passed? And that's a question for, I guess, for the director. My second question is the investigation still ongoing? And it just seems like a long time for an incident that occurred 2 months ago, if it is. And so I'm wondering what the typical amount of time is on a similar investigation, I guess related to, use of force inside the institution. And then third, my question is about the claims in the article that there were amendments to the incident report filed, I think, if I recall correctly, almost a month after the incident happened. And given the way that memories can change, and it doesn't seem like appropriate. And again, I don't know how you handle those things, but I'm wondering if you can comment on that sort of, ex post facto amendment to an incident report weeks later, and whether or not that is appropriate. So I guess 3 questions there.
Dr. Smith, can you repeat the first one? I think if you paid me more.
The first one, Director, was just a question about where investigations such as the one discussed this morning by the Post-Dispatch and discussed in the press conference last week would fit into the resolution we just passed regarding notification of the advisory board.
And to answer the first question, I think it's the first committee we talked about when incidents do occur, major or minor, that we have a framed charge both us communicating to the board members in a timely fashion as soon as we can gather as much information that we could share. So that is where that will be captured.
Okay.
Just to let you know, we didn't know about the dispatch article ourselves till this morning ourselves. So there's still understanding that in both instances there's ongoing investigation still taking place. And when the investigations are complete, that's when, we'll have the opportunity to look at everything. And that's where the second piece is the information we can share to all parties involved and let you know what came out of the investigation. But the investigations, because there's several investigations going on. So some of them at completing stages, some are midway. So they're all working in sync independently. So right now, the various investigations are still ongoing.
I'd like to know if there's a possibility that when an incident happens, even if you all are still conducting the investigation, that an alert can be sent out to the board members. Hey, there was an incident, more information is forthcoming. Because waiting for you guys to finish and do the investigation, that allows time for the Post-Dispatch to write something before you guys even inform us of anything.
I think that's a good point. It goes back to what I intended to drive at a little bit ago around the language that would be meaningful for you and the public in those early stages, for example, of something happening, knowing that if internal processes remain. Sorry, no, knowing that internal processes may still be in play, or it's very early in that process, what kind of language is meaningful from us as an institution to you or the public, to recognize that there's a limitation, of what is able to be communicated? Or another scenario might be, what is meaningful, what kind of language might be meaningful that we could respond appropriately if perceptions are shared with us that, for what we know at the time, maybe those two things conflict. What we know, for example, at a given time may conflict with perception that we are asked or told about, but how do we respond to that in a way that's helpful? And the third thing that I would say that it would help a lot for us to understand how to do this well is to define that level of incident, because all day, every day, we may have individuals, patients, coming through the facility that we are enacting our processes as normal, but we'd like to understand what is that degree, what's that definition of incident that's meaningful for you all to hear more about.
And if I can add, and that's very key, because, for example, we sometimes, when I first got here, I got some complaints before I got here, they had to shut the water off, and because of the piping system, and there was concerns that the inmates didn't have water. And then when I looked into it, we have bought and bottled water, there's a system in place that it happens here every once in a while, but it was not quite how it was being communicated. So that's other examples from operations. Things happen, elevators go down. I think defining what you like to know, what level incident, will be very helpful, because there's things that happen daily, and then there's things that sort of gravitate to the top. Go ahead.
For me, I would think the level of incident that I would like to hear about is anything that would give a person on the outside cause to say, hey, my loved one is being neglected or mistreated. So if I was to get a phone call from someone in the Justice Center and they told me, hey, we don't have any water, we can't use any bathroom, that would be cause of concern for me, because water is essential. So I would like to say, and then if I did get into not that there's being neglect, there's actually some work being work on this center taking place, and that's easy. It does not have to escalate to something major. But when we don't know, then that's when thoughts become rampant, and things that's minor become major because we don't know.
So like Ms. Lee, for example, like and this is where we can build on the process. We recently they were doing some work on the back of the jail, putting in the cement, and we had to change how we introduced and how people got received in the jail. And we sent it out to all the stakeholders in the jail. All the staff were aware of it, because things might be delayed. So even law enforcement. But even though that might seem minor to the public, but it might be where someone knows someone and they say, well, there's something in the jail because we had to wait an extra 10 minutes to go in. And if you're aware of it, he goes, yeah, they're doing some construction work, and things will be delayed for this period of time. So all those things can be misconstrued, and we'll share those moving forward, because it's good that you know as a board member.
In these recent incidents, the ones that are even mentioned in the Post-Dispatch, whether it be last week's press conference or this morning, part of the investigation, is it also being done by IT? Is IT looking into these additional going back in, moving reports? Is an IT investigation being launched as well? And if so, by who?
When our internal investigation takes place by our integrity manager, he looks at all the procedures, looks at documentation, and verifies if these reports were done by this person. So all those things are delineated and part of the investigation process. Reverend DeVoe.
Hold on, I'm sorry. Let me make sure I understand that. So part of the internal affairs investigation or the integrity officer also checks to see if these entries have been made. Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. They look at timestamps and look at making sure the right people, everyone involved wrote their.
And are those, even though we're not talking about access now to the final report, but are those part of the report?
Yes, it will be. Yes, sir.
Phil?
Yes, please, Mayor.
The, it's my understanding, tell me if I'm wrong, that the first two incidents were transferred by Executive Page to St. Charles for internal affairs investigation. Is that correct?
What I can tell you is there's several different partners investigating it. Basically, we have the Clayton PD, whenever there's an incident, they're investigating it. I know the PA office is investigating it. And we also reached out to St. Charles to have an independent review as well. And we have our internal investigation, and then Valerie does her medical review as well.
You have duplicate investigations by St. Charles Internal Affairs and St. Louis County Internal Affairs on the first two events?
All independent.
Well, do you know now, will this third one, the one from May 27th, is this one going to be included?
That is the same expectation moving forward. Yes, sir. Similar incident.
Can you tell us why the St. Charles Internal Affairs is involved at all?
It's not practice. It was requested. I mean, they're an agency that sort of has their scope like ours. So I can't tell you the reason why, but it's not a bad practice. I mean, many of us in the industry ask other similar folks who are in the practice to come in and sort of look at what process improvements or look at it as well.
Per policy number 807, the subject is event log. At your opportunity, Director, will you please check with Valerie, because I don't notice in this event log, I know it's on the correctional side, but I don't see where medical is a part of the event log unless, Valerie, do you have a separate event log that is not part of the jail event log?
I'm not familiar with policy 807 specifically for justice services, but I can say that my team does have a structured process to document and review and take action on all patient safety risks that are brought to us. So there is a log associated with that, as well as reports and action items. Is that
okay?
It's documenting all the events taking place, so yours will probably be more detailed from the medical perspective. But we will look at that record just to make sure. That's like another opportunity to look at policy and make sure we're mirroring same practices, perhaps different information because HIPAA. But then,
Okay.
Some of what we just did recently with those policies.
So I just pulled this down this morning, but something caught my attention. It's policy 807, number 3, procedures. I'm going to go down to the bottom of page 1 on 807. Significant events occurring in the area will be documented in the, what is that, DJMS? Entered into the daily pass down log. So that's why I referenced the IT. Wouldn't this be able to show if these documents are being filed in a timely manner? Also, what disturbs me is as I've been looking at the use of force policy and looking at the restraint policy, I don't see any definite time where these reports need to be done in a timely manner. Can we find out, are these daily reports done before they leave their shift? And or I see one of them, I can't know which one, that gives 5 days. I'm curious to know why it takes so long to compile a report of a significant incident that should be notified before they leave their workspace.
Reverend, I'll forward, we have a policy and incident report. It's to be done the same day before your shift is over. So the requirement is when all parties involved have to submit their incident reports and documentation before they leave that shift.
Now, so with that said, if they're in compliance to that, are they then allowed 30, 40, 50 days later to go back in and make a revision?
That should not be we'll look at the policy, but that should be not the practice, because you're required to complete your documentation and it's
Okay, so this board wants to know what's been done, because we talk about the culture. We do know, or we believe, I believe, can't speak for all of us. I believe the culture is there, and this has been going on prior to you coming in. And if these are past practices, they need to stop immediately because they're not in compliance with their own policy. I'm sorry, I think Jeff wants to jump in. Jeff?
Yes, I just wanted to clarify, Reverend, along the lines of what you just asked. Is there, I'm assuming that there's a way to delineate between the original copy of the incident report and subsequent edits that are made to the report? And assuming that there is there an exploration as part of any investigation of why it maybe took several weeks for a person to remember, the additional facts or changes that were made? Can you talk about how that's handled, generally speaking, in an investigation?
That generally, in any profession, especially corrections, there's reports done. For example, incident report, and then when it gets to the review process, they might have had the inmate's name wrong. So they have to go ahead and amend it and put the proper name because they were in a rush. There could be an opportunity where they were like, oh, I didn't, but they the original, and then they have to justify the purpose of amending a report, because sometimes it's just to make sure that the names, demographics, but traditionally in the industry, the scenario should be very specific, with the exception of some typos. But that's why we require them to do it before they leave their shift, so it's fresh in their mind. I.e., there will be examples where maybe there's a injury and they're sent to the hospital. Those situations are noted that they were not able to do the report immediately because they were being treated, but they did it the minute they were able to get to the report. And usually we try to get to that unless the staff member is really jerked back.
That's why the IT audit of those documents is so important as a part of the internal affairs report that Dr. Duval brought up before. If there is an IT audit, and there should be, you'll be able to see every single entry, every single time somebody looked at it, somebody changed it, and that will be enlightening, I think, for the director as well.
So I'd like to make a motion that since we are already working on the new committee to talk about this process of the incident reporting and review of what that will look like and how that conforms to the accrediting board, because I want to make sure that from Mary's conversation earlier, that is also a part of the process, that we are looking at that accrediting board as the hallmark of how that process gets put together, that process also include, because I do know that the DJMS system does include all of those timestamp pieces, but that the incident process include all of the timestamp changes as a direct portion of the review of how that incident could have been avoided, how that incident is addressed from a disciplinary fashion, and then how that incident is communicated.
I'm happy to participate on that subcommittee when it moves forward. I don't know who else. Alex might be helpful too, from a process point of view, and anybody else who would like to give input. But I'd like to propose that just so that we can move it forward and we know that there are actual names of people who are going to be working on it.
Thank you.
There was a motion, I think. Not sure there was a second.
Oh, was that a motion that I just made?
I made
Well,
it
I
a
think
motion. We're going to
Spring,
get more formal and we're going to get these action steps. I
yeah,
made a motion. All of that is explicitly included and it conformed to the accrediting body's guidelines for how the process be conducted.
I second.
Second that motion.
okay, now there's a second.
Alex? Who seconded? Who was the second? Oh, Jeff went.
All in favor?
Roll call, please.
Reverend Duvall,
Yes.
Dr. Garza,
Yes.
Ms. Taylor,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes.
Dr. Smith,
Yes.
Ms. Lee,
Yes.
Smith,
Yes.
You get everything?
Is there any more discussion on item number 5? Any more concerns about incident reports and use of, oh, I have a question, Mr. Benasco.
Yes, sir.
Are we gonna have, is this board gonna have access to the findings from St. Charles Internal Affairs Report?
I think when they're all completed, and once there should be discussion on all the outcomes of all the reports, because it's all collaborative.
Okay, thank you.
Hey, Reverend Duvall.
Yes, sir.
Just a really quick question, and we don't have to spend any time on it, but I did look through those policies that were sent to us. I think it was the use of restraints and use of force policies. And I was trying to understand what it looked like they were revised this month. And maybe this is just a clarification from the staff. Are the words that are in brackets, is that the addition to the policy? And it seemed like there was a different colored font. Did that mean anything? So I was trying to understand what was contained within those policies and what was new.
Absolutely.
Doctor, all the revisions are the ones that are italicized. Those are the revisions, because the existing ones are on all the italicized are the revisions. Moving forward, we can also highlight them in yellow. That would be more helpful.
Well, the only thing that's italicized is like words like shift captain, supervisor, taser 7, and then there's brackets around some of these, like I'm looking at, and again, we don't have to spend a ton of time on this.
No,
But,
we'll send them back out again in yellow.
Uh-huh.
So you'll see all the revisions and make it easier. We
Phil.
can do
okay, and then my second comment that just very briefly, and I think this goes back to the structure process comment I made earlier. It was confusing to me to understand the restraint policy sort of married up with the use of force policy. They seem like two separate policies, but they were related. And so I think it might be a good idea for your staff to spend a little time to see where you can make those policies more congruent, because sometimes they conflict with each other, and that can create some confusion. So just an overall comment.
Okay, I'm sorry, Mary. I also see Valerie hands up. So either Valerie or Mary.
I just wanted to say, as it relates to the policies, I appreciate all the work that goes into policy and procedures, and it's a painful process. But when I get a policy that I know has been changed, and we have changes on both the corrective side, and then yesterday afternoon we got the ones from the medical side. And I also noticed that the in-depth custody review policy was changed in January. And I didn't know that, but I just noticed it when I reviewed. From my point of view, what would be helpful if from this day forward, we're going to operate under a structure of process improvement. When policies are changed, I need to know why they were changed. What gap did you identify that caused you to change it? And I understand the answers to those are sometimes embarrassing. I get it, but we don't move forward, and Valerie knows this, but we don't move forward unless we say we've got a gap here and we've identified it, which is really good news, by the way. And this is how we're going to behave going forward. And then after that, it doesn't stop there. After that, because this is the same for all those deaths, is how do we measure the effectiveness of all those things we put into place? So first of all, what was the gap? What did we do to improve it? And how do we know it's working? Do we only know because another person didn't die, or are we able to anticipate before the next person dies or gets hurt that the stuff we changed in that policy and then we taught people is actually effective in terms of performance?
Well, I think to answer
Amen.
just to answer that real quickly, I think standing up the subcommittee, those are all the dialogues that should take place. And sometimes changes happen in all policies because in the industry, something has changed, you know.
Yeah, that's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about substantive changes, yeah.
And that should be discussed in the standing up of the charges of the subcommittee when we look at policy should be reviewed annually and when things happen, and that's where that discussion should take place. Absolutely.
Okay. I just don't think it's an annual review. I don't think it was a coincidence that we got new changes in both the corrections and medicine's use of force, right? This is not an annual review. This is something that happened because the stuff has hit the fan. And I think it would be really helpful to know that you're improving things and what have you improved and why. And that's all I'm saying. I think we can, and I agree that the subcommittee will work on this and that moving forward, we will act in a different way. But I think this is what builds trust.
So
I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Spring, sorry. Valerie, did you want to weigh in? I thought I saw your hand go up.
I very, very clearly can say that the reason that I looked through and my leadership looked through what our previous policy was for the medical care that was defined at the time or given at the time of the use of restraints was absolutely because of what we just recently became aware of. So there have been, there are structures that have been put in place from a management approach that we are much, much more diligent and structured in the way that we go through and regularly review policies and document what that is. The other catalyst, and I will say this with no embarrassment, the other catalyst is when things are brought to light that warrant that review. That's also what we're seeing take place as we move through the patient safety risk program that we've stood up. It leads to revisions, and I like that. I want to continue that. So when I distributed the draft earlier for the healthcare that we are providing at those instances, I very much, it was intentional to recognize that there's a lot that we is being done in medical, for example, that had not been called out in that historical policy, because frankly, I think every policy that we look at that I'll speak only for medical, there's a vast amount of improvement that can be made on nearly every single one of those pieces of documentation. And we're moving through that. But I'll just say, I made those changes and put forward a draft for input with no embarrassment. This is what should be happening.
And the collaboration with Texas Medicine, like colleges, to make sure that we're in sync, because we're finding in some of them we weren't, and that's something we inherited, and we just gotta improve on.
You know, many of our policies conflict between justice services and medicine, and so inevitably, if either of us have been the last several months looking at changes, we do sit down and collaborate to improve that alignment.
Okay, thank you, Spring.
May I make a motion then? Well, let me ask the question first, because if we don't want this to take place, so I would like to know what policies are changing. I don't always see them from the position that I have. I would like that in the monthly meetings for my health department, I provide a packet of changed policies as part of the agenda for my upcoming meeting. And so I would like to make a motion that we could because I don't want to go look out on the website and find out what's new sort of accidentally. So as part of the packet, if policies and procedures and this process of culture, as well as this continuous process improvement, I would like to see changed policies be in the packet that's delivered prior to the board meeting. And then if we need to discuss why something was changed or something is highlighted as a comment in those changes, to say, this is because there's been, in review of an incident, we found an opportunity for process improvement. This is to align the procedures between justice services, or this is from community feedback, or this is because the accreditation body changed and it's time to give this update. Like I would like to see those and see them. And I'm happy to read them in my packet prior to this meeting. And then if we need to just, and maybe even ratify them in this meeting, so that we could maybe add or communicate that. Just so I'm happy to make it a motion if everyone else agrees that that's what we're willing to do. I don't mind doing some pre-work for this meeting.
Spring, just a comment, and I think it's really ideal opportunity, whoever serves on the subcommittee will have more involvement, and you're right. And once what we come out of that committee, what we all agree on, improvements, revisions, then send that to the entire board. So this way you guys have it ahead of time, but it comes from the subcommittee on policy reviews.
Why don't we have it as a standard agenda item?
That's a good suggestion as well. I think that's a good suggestion, Ms. Taylor.
Okay. I don't know if we need the motion as much as I believe it's being captured in the minutes. But it's up to the board. If somebody would like to entertain that motion, so be it. If not, I think it's captured in the minutes and we can move on.
Reverend, I think Ms. Taylor has a good idea. We can make that standing meeting. Any policy revisions, discussions, SOPs, medicine, or
I don't think we need a motion. We've made that request and the director has agreed.
Okay. Thank you, Spring, for highlighting that, and it's duly noted, and we'll move forward with that language. I'd like to go to item number 6, please, the COVID-19 overview from Corrections Medicine. Valerie, you have the floor.
So we are now in that steady state process where every new individual who is admitted into the jail does receive a test. He or she can decline, but we work really hard to reduce that number.
Excuse me, Valerie, would everybody go on mute so Valerie can be heard, please?
I'll quickly recap. We said we're in the steady state process of testing all individuals who come into the jail. And that happens on a specific cadence each week. Moving forward for the first week of August, that will actually be increased for a couple of reasons, so that we can better manage the population, so that they do spend the appropriate amount of time in isolation and then quarantine, and we can maintain a high confidence in their wellness before moving into the general population. But through that proactive testing and for employees, we did during the last week, it was the 16th, I believe, session of testing, we identified 3 additional patients who were positive. So that brings us to a total of 8 patients through the history of our testing so far that have tested positive. We've conducted, I don't have the exact number with me, I'm sorry, from what I said earlier in the week, but we've tested approximately 1,500, or conducted approximately 1,500 specimen collections so far. So that's what's happening with the surveillance of the asymptomatic individuals. I don't like to see that we've had the positives, but it is reassuring that all that we have seen are the ones that have come in new through intake, and that we are catching those through that purposeful, proactive testing approach. We also were alerted of a few additional staff that had tested positive, so that brings us to a total of 14 across justice services and corrections medicine that we know about. And, we do expect that more of us will continue as time goes on to become ill just because of being out in the community and living life. What we continue to do to try to mitigate that and maintain awareness throughout the staff is to do things like public service announcements, emails that come out around the current state of the virus within our facility, best practices that are put out by the CDC and DPH, things like that. We have a visual campaign that is, posters. That's actually getting a facelift over the next week or so as well. We conduct staff briefings where we focus on these types of things. All of the staff have had masks provided for a couple of months now. And also for a few months now, we have had and continue to champion the no-cost testing that's available for our staff. And we do actually have for the juvenile staff, the justice services staff, and my staff, a special availability to the rapid tests. So that helps us manage the contact tracing at the workplace for possible exposures. We're able to cycle our staff through that testing process with greater agility. And we can again have greater confidence that if they're going home to their families, and as they come back into the facility, that we're monitoring as very proactively that they are not ill.
Another thing, just to add to our covert initiatives to get proactive, we received yesterday 2 units. They're actually being used in the industry. The airplanes a unit. It's like a desterilizer. It's a unit. We're gonna send the board a little information on it. It's water sanitization based, so we can also add another layer of sanitation and safety and sterilization. All the housing cells, all the workstations for the staff. It's almost like a fogger, but it's not detrimental to anyone's health. So we were fortunate to get 2 of those units. We're in the process of looking at how we're going to deploy them and working with medical, but it's a great piece of equipment for us to use. So we'll send you the information so you're aware of this new product that we're going to use to help keep the COVID.
Are you both of you, are you receiving feedback also from your workers in terms of how they identify areas? Are you getting feedback from them?
Well, feedback in any, for example, like we're getting face shields now, which is going to be more helpful. Some of them prefer to use these. We just got a shipment of the N95. They're easier to breathe in. Some are using the cloth ones that we're making. We're giving them some flexibility. I think some of them have sinus issues. They prefer to use the cloth one. And then some days we have them, they have an option. So, and as far as like all the sanitation, all the product, we're constantly all the command staff and the shift supervisors ensuring, but we get feedback recently. They were like, well, can we use these? And we order these also, because these are I enjoy these better. So I'm getting feedback.
I can say we have about 500 people across our 3 departments that know my number, and I do think that I get personal ideas and just notification that we ran low last night on surgical masks and it didn't get brought down from the supply room. So I hear things like that.
Okay, thank you.
Reverend
Valerie.
So go ahead, Alex.
Oh, just a really sort of tactical question, Valerie. So when you said that some of the intake, some of the people can refuse a COVID test, is that right?
They can.
Okay.
They can.
Yeah. So is there a protocol for isolating them for? Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I did want to comment though that you guys have done a great job of keeping COVID out of the jail. So
Yeah.
I did want to compliment you on that.
Thank you. We have mirrored the process for both departments that was already in place for tuberculosis. And so if someone does choose to decline the COVID test, then there's an isolation protocol that occurs. And I think that we have only had less than a handful that have declined and did not later change their mind, at any time within a day or so. So we've had good participation from it.
Reverend Duvall, just real quick, just to agree with Alex that you've done a great job on keeping this out of the jail in general. There have been bigger problems in other prisons outside of Missouri, as you know, and Alex knows better than anybody else that the numbers are rising in Missouri. So all of us are worried about that. And so when I see this number of 3 in that last report, it makes me a little nervous that I hope we're not starting to see a little bit of the spread into the jail. So, I hope you keep your eyes on that. Because that's the first time I've seen a number that sort of worries me a little bit, because just been one here and one there, and that's really not a big deal. Well, anything's a big deal, but this was, so, I applaud you for paying attention to this. I just keep doing what you're doing. And, and I think there was something else I was going to say about that. There's 3 awaiting results too. You don't know anything more about that because it's now about 5 days past that.
When I checked yesterday, the file had not been updated yet. What we are seeing, and honestly, I haven't checked today. I do it every day in the afternoon, but our data file usually comes in around mid-afternoon. We have seen in the last week that there have been individual test specimens that don't come back with the rest of the group, and so then I'm checking on that. So I think that so what has happened, or what that status was on Monday when I sent out the overview, our live log that we work from on a regular basis has been updated since then. I don't recall the specific individuals at this point, but I'll confirm with the board today that those had been received since in the meantime.
Yeah, that's fine. I just want to also say that this is a really good example of transparency and fast turnaround and reporting to the board, and just to highlight that and point out thank you. And
Phil. So I want to echo to Valerie. Two things. First, early on, I think I was a little frustrated because we didn't hear anything, and I think everybody was dancing pretty fast. So I understood that. So I remember I got a long verbal report from you about the proactive things you guys put into place, I think way before lots of other people were doing it. And then the next day or shortly thereafter, there was a written report to the rest of the board. And so I was also impressed with detail behind your preventive steps. So that is to be applauded. And it's also not to be taken for granted. I'm in a group of folks who go into jails as volunteer chaplains and spiritual directors. And we know that it has spread in prisons, but county jails across the country have had terrible problems because it's a lot of in and a lot of out. And it's and I think a lot of them were very slow to enact the kind of really rigid stuff that you put into place. So I applaud you for that. And this has been one area where I have felt like ever since then, I have been able to trust what was coming out because we got frequent and really detailed reports. So thank you very much for that.
A couple of questions. Do we use bleach, and what is our inventory on bleach? And the second question is, are these inmates that have COVID, are they put in an isolated cells? Are they, separated from the general population?
Most definitely. I can tell you as an example of what happened just with the last notification of these 3 individuals. The test results came back on Sunday afternoon, and I was on the phone with 2 of my colleagues from Justice Services and immediately enacting these protocols that we put into place back in March. They've been defined all that time. And so we were on the phones with the staff that were here, the watch commanders and so forth. Yes, and so they were immediately moved to the isolation areas that we've defined. And it has been a really strong collaboration, I can say. But to answer your question about isolation, absolutely. So what we do have is a continuum of medical care that could be offered or delivered rather, depending on what an individual's symptoms require. And that may vary, you know, if certain medications are administered, or if the provider sees the individual more so or more often at a more frequent cadence than another individual who's asymptomatic. But isolation is always the first step for all of these, as is for all of their cellmates. And then we do the equivalent of a contact tracing process here. Past cellmates that others in that pod that might have been exposed, as well as the staff working on those pods.
Just to add to that all the staff of corrections medicine and operations are in proper PPEs from gowns. So all those precautions and all the protocols in place are followed by any staff member, operations and corrections medicine. So we've been very fortunate, and I think that's why we've been very successful.
And your inventory on cleaning supplies is steady?
We're very steady. We have supply, and we're constantly always replenishing it. Yes, sir.
That was also the very first step, was the distribution protocol that we put in place at the end of February. And at the time, we did not have the inventory of the FDA approved products for COVID specifically, and so we worked with our county contractor that conducts the cleaning in this facility. They obtained it. Justice Services obtained it, and DPH obtained the FDA-approved products as well.
Thank you. Any further questions from any board members on this COVID? Okay, Mr. Bonaska, I believe you've discussed about the jail census.
I have some more information. The 769, 554 pretrial, 9 have been sentenced. We have 102 federal contract inmates, and we have 104 probation violators. And just to mention, we have been very fortunate with the Missouri Department of Corrections. We're keeping a very low number of sentenced inmates. We're one of the few counties across America that, because we've done a great job with COVID, they're accepting our sentenced inmates. Throughout the country, many folks are not accepting them. So my transportation team makes every effort to get them through the Department of Corrections. So that is the census. I know that was important that we gave that information.
Okay, I'd like to afford Jeff Smith some opportunity to speak. He's gonna have to jump off soon. So Jeff, if you have something you want to ask, could you please go ahead and get your questions or comments in before you have to leave us?
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, Reverend Duvall. Are we going into closed session next? And if so, can we, are there going to be any more votes that you're planning?
We can offer the closed session as a motion, but of course, we don't know if it's gonna carry or not. At this time, I don't recognize any reason to go in closed session.
Okay. Yeah, no, I am not making that motion.
Okay.
So yeah, I appreciate that opportunity. Thank you to you for your leadership here. Thank you, Director Bonasco, and to Valerie for your feedback today and for the information, and look forward to the changes that we've passed today being implemented over the next several weeks.
Okay, thank you, sir.
Okay, take care.
We'll be in touch.
Okay, sounds good.
Okay,
Take care.
thank you. We'd like to go, is there a need for closed session? Again, I believe that there's no reason to, but any board members, are there questions that you want to ask or pertaining to the incident of any sensitivity? Let's ask those questions now before we go to new business. Is there any comments that any other board members would like to discuss before we go forward in the agenda? Very well.
Speak to the corrections medicine dashboard now, or I can follow up with the subcommittee at your choice.
I'd like to go to the dashboard now, please.
Looks like we're going to share that on the screen for everyone. Yes, that dashboard.
Excuse me, is this session being recorded? I requested that it be recorded and I wondered if it has been. I should have brought that up in the beginning.
It is.
Thank you very much. And will we be posting it along on the meetings and agendas website for the public?
I'll follow with Mr. Capizzi. I mean, it's a public website. I mean, Steve?
I mean, I think the board could vote, and if the board wants to do that, that's possible. We'd have to obviously coordinate, or the board would have to coordinate that with the people in St. Louis County who post things. But yeah, it is being recorded. This entire meeting, I believe, has been recorded, and would be available if the board would request that to be posted. That would be up to the board.
I make a motion that we record all meetings, that it be posted on the Justice Center Advisory Board meetings and agenda page, which I think you guys already post minutes and things on. But anyway, that's my motion, that it be recorded and that it be posted for the public.
That's the motion. I second it.
Dr. McBride?
Reverend Duvall,
Yes.
Dr.
Yes.
Taylor,
Yes.
McBride,
Yes.
Ms. Lee. Ms. Lee,
Did you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
did you vote yes?
Yes.
Ms. Schmidt,
Yes.
No, I don't know why. It's not letting me share.
It's not allowing us to open it up, huh?
Are we looking for the dashboards that were sent to us ahead of time?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, at least we've seen them, but the public won't be able to see them.
For some reason, it's not opening up.
Speak to them at this time, or how would we like to proceed?
I'd like you to go ahead and do a verbal.
Okay. All right, starting with the safety metrics, we'll see what seems to be quite an uptick in the number of individuals that required care or transfer for medical care. And again, just as a reminder of what that data, what that metric is defined as, it is planned transfers as well as urgent ones. And we know that the reason for that upward trend over the last month is due to a couple of things. We did increase the scope of planned external consults that could be opened up safely with respect to infection control. And we also did have one individual patient who required 20 of those 33 consults. And that was due to an ongoing condition for that individual. So that was an upward trend, but one that we believe is for the one reason of opening back up to a broader scope of external specialists. That is a positive step, and the second root cause comes comes with it's what the patient needs. Oh, it looks like we are sharing now here. All right, next, the acute care was down just a bit. We do have our providers that are in-house 24/7. We have had some transfers out that were due to symptoms that we felt to be extra cautious that that's what was needed, but nothing too alarming at this point. The percentage of individuals with a safety event for June was down to 4. We did look at all
Hey,
of this.
Valerie,
Yes,
could I ask you, just in the interest of time, could you brief by exception, meaning
certainly.
pick those metrics where there's a substantial change from baseline?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Absolutely. I would point out that you'll see a difference in the percentage of persons with a sentinel event versus the related metric for an M&M review, and that was because the M&M reviews were conducted in July. Those events happened late in June, and therefore just from a calendar perspective, that's where it is. The percentage of individuals with medical clinics for the or visits with medical clinic, you see a stark decline in that. And we figured out what the reason was. And it was because the patients that had their clinic appointments scheduled were declining at that time when it was time for them to move down to the clinic, because they would have missed commissary time. And that was understandable. We have worked with just better alignment and scheduling on the individual floors as that happens, and then also that with allowing those individuals who have appointments in the clinic, they perhaps jump to the front of the line for the commissary if the
We
card is in
extended
their
the
line.
hours, we
Right.
extended the
Yeah.
clinic hours as well.
Yeah, so that's what it was. The increase that you see for the medical visits to the infirmary is entirely due to our cycling individuals through either for isolation after we have identified some kind of COVID-related symptom that warrants us to treat that individual as a person under investigation, and or that they are there for symptoms, even if we choose to isolate them there entirely for COVID.
So, excuse me, Valerie, we had some offline conversation with you about this in our little subcommittee of Dr. Garza and us, and I know he just dropped off. He mentioned that there may be some that has relatively low denominators. This may be one of them, because I noticed that, I pointed out that this rose 4 months in a row, but I also note that the number of visits is 10. So is this one where the denominator is pretty small? So, it's 10%. It's been rising from 4 to 10%. So it looks like, oh my gosh, it's rising. It's doubled. But is it really doubling from 4 to 10? Is that really what's going on?
Actually, for all of these delivery metrics, and this is called out in that second document that gets sent out with the glossary, but the denominator is not 10 in this case. It is just and here we have a coincidence where the percentage is 10% and the actual count of medical infirmary visits was 10% or was 10. So the denominator here, I will make sure that I explicitly state this. It's the number of patients with a medical provider visit at the infirmary divided by the number of people that were admitted to the jail and the census of the last day of the previous month. So it would, in this case, the denominator is everyone that came into the jail during the month of June plus everyone that was here on the last day of May.
So the denominator is a lot bigger than that. Yeah, okay.
Does that help clarify?
It does. So this is a real increase.
Yes, but we feel very confident that it's due to COVID because we are cycling. We have 4 negative pressure rooms in the clinic, and we have been very, very proactive and cautious from the very beginning of seeing possible symptoms related to COVID that we put them into the negative pressure room until we know otherwise that they're negative.
Okay.
if the results are negative.
Okay, and as I pointed out on my note, this is rising, but it may not necessarily be a bad thing. It may be you're doing the right thing.
I do feel confident in this one that it is a proactive, cautious approach to COVID symptoms.
Thank you.
Then likewise, we could jump down to the bottom with the psych visit in the infirmary. We have an additional psychiatry provider that we're using via telehealth, and so we can cycle more individuals through there. Okay. Most of the next page for the patient characteristics, there is not really anything of note. We do see at that very top metric, which is one of the real kind of stoplight indicators, if you will. We do continue to see approximately half of the individuals that see a provider. It does involve some sort of mental health need, a diagnosis, and it's been relatively consistent, but I do think it's important to point that out.
It really is important because it points out what your population looks like, and the public needs to know that.
Exactly, and I will say the other concept, perhaps, to understand that of why it's so important to understand these individuals and the size of that population is that, again, individuals, when they are in this facility, they are able to make their individual judgment, and if they decline medication, that is an individual's choice. And when we do have a population that is clearly struggling, this is just the environment that we navigate through for their healthcare.
This really gets to the social determinants of health and what we're having a broader conversation about in society about.
Absolutely.
What's the role of policing and jails, and it's clearly we're doing mental health in this facility.
Absolutely.
Just a comment.
On the next page for the population characteristics, again, this is the self-reported information that individuals provide during the medical assessments at the intake process. There's really nothing to note here. It's been relatively stable and nothing stood out too much. The next section of more of the business operations. I do have an in-depth overview, if you will, on the root causes of the staffing shortages that my team specifically has experienced historically, and also the responses that we have taken. And I can cycle that, share that with the board at your direction if it is, if you'd like to see the written assessment of this, and then we talk about it next month. If you'd like me to address that now, I'll take your direction on it. But we have, in general, yes, we are seeing quite an uptick since March of open positions. We know that, I don't have it right in front of me right now. I think we lost 4 people because of their concern of working in this environment during COVID. So we also had two open positions that are due to purposeful attrition. There were, these were individuals that had a high number of patient grievances associated with their work. And we chose, one was an agency staff that had been here for quite some time, and we chose to discontinue the use of her services, and likewise with another full-time employee. So, as I said, we can talk at the end of this if I'm interested in your thoughts of how you'd like to see what we've done already, and I'm very, very interested in your thoughts on how some other responses that I might take to address this. Okay. The budget is trending downward as expected because we are starting to, we're at that point in the year, just so normal use of supplies and materials, but we are also moving through that equipment procurement plan that was established at the end of last year. So that still we will see in the next couple of months quite a drop in the budget because of just the procurement process going through its cycle there. Oh, I'm sorry. Mary, did you have a question?
No. I thought you were done. I'll wait till the end.
Okay. The last thing that I want to share is that there are 2 additional metrics that were included here for this month. This is what we've been talking about. That community liaison program was launched at the end of March. And I sent to the data subcommittee that Dr. Garza and Dr. McBride an alternative visualization for these 2 metrics so that we can get to that right presentation of what is meaningful to the board. What we see here in this report is the same model of information as what these previous metrics are. So meaning, for example, with the number of and I jumped ahead. I'm sorry. The first metric that you see is patient grievances, but the second new one is the community ombudsman line. But the way that these are modeled in this current version is that we see the overall highest level grouping of that metric, and then each specific, for example, the number of patient grievances, the reason for those grievances is then called out in those subsequent lower level metrics. And then likewise for the reason that the community engages us to inquire and ask a question about their loved one. So this is what the information shows so far. This is, again, just a continuation of that consistent model of visualization. And then I'll look forward to that further subcommittee and larger board feedback of how do we make this presented in a meaningful way.
Phil, thank you very much for that, Valerie. That's one of the things I was going to suggest, that we just add it to that. It's on the continuum of information that I think the board would like to know, and how you drill down and look at more detail is helpful, not just for the medical folks, but the other thing I was going to say is, is the tab for the correction side being used too? But the answer is, you don't have to have the answer now, but I think it should be included in all the things we're talking about, because feedback from the community and feedback from patients are going to make any vision that we have of the jail richer, I think.
Mary, can you help me make sure that I understand that right? On the community inquiry line, are you asking for the information around the source of that inquiry versus, is it a phone call? We have 3 main methods for receipt. It's a phone call, it's an email address, and it's also the button on the Justice Services website where you see that contact and address information.
Yeah, I think we can talk about that. We don't have to spend the time here, but I think the source of the contact is helpful, because it tells us how easy it is for the community to reach us and which one is being most effective, I think. I mean, if the tab on the website isn't being used very much at all, then it tells us something, doesn't it? And then the content of the, I saw in the medical one, some people just want to know how they're doing. I know they're in the medical section now of the jail, and how are they doing? And so we can, I think we want a little more detail, because if things are sticking out, but we can talk about that in that group. And I welcome Tim and Alex's data brains to that conversation too.
I do have, for the community liaison information already, we do track the entry source. I can send that now in the interim.
Well, why don't we just, I think it's a lot, when we get a lot of emails, and we got a lot of emails this month, and I don't want to complain about a lot of communication, but let's talk about how it's best digested by the board and what the board really wants in terms of granularity. And we can ask them, does this look right, or is this too much, or is this not enough?
I think we already have a subcommittee working on this data element, Alex and I, with you, Valerie, and others. And the comments I heard already are all making my mind percolate. And if you have any thoughts about this, Mary, you can just send them to me and Alex, and we'll cycle with Valerie. And I think this is really headed in the right direction. I really like this addition of the whatever you want to call it, community comments, just so we get the tweaking it quite right, so that it measures what we want it to measure. I think it's pretty close, but maybe not quite close. But that's not a criticism. You're really moving in the right direction. So.
Any additional comments for Valerie on the medical side? Any board members? Thank you, Valerie. Director Benasco, when does the statistician, when does he come on board, he or she?
He should be onboarding hopefully next week. Once I get his information, I'll share his name and his little brief announcement on his credentials, and I'll share it so you'll have a face with him.
And I wanna again go back to several months. Dr. Garza had asked Director that you begin a similar dashboard. And I know you and I have talked recently. Could you kind of inform the board what your dashboard is gonna consume of?
And I think when I look at Valerie's, I think it's important that we look at specific incidents. Where is the trend on uses of forces? Where are the trends on staff injuries? Pertinent information, well, how are we doing on inmate grievances? You know, what's the trends? What are the grievances focusing on? Is it particular bedtime or particular, it might be they're not getting their items in property, but bringing and looking at some other areas of information that sort of give us a review of the detail pertaining to staff, operations, and injuries and occurrences that are happening. So that's what I talked about earlier. The next week I'll send out a draft. I'm sort of going to map off what Valerie's done and put some factors and see what feedback and what pertinent information you as a board think you can add. So I'm going to really lean on feedback as well.
If I could comment, Duvall.
Yes, sir.
So I think, yeah, using the model that Valerie just laid out, I think would be great, Director Benasco. And per the comments we had earlier, you know, I think you always open up the meeting by telling us a snapshot of how many people are in the jail, you know, this number of males, this number of females, whatever. You know, I think what you saw in that dashboard just now is a timeline of a few months. And I recall when we first got on the board, we would see a PowerPoint that laid out a timeline. It would be great to see like a month to month or whatever it would be to see a timeline of just the population by certain metrics. Also, given what's going on in community policing and what I know some of the changes that are going on in the county and, you know, the releases that are going on, it would be really useful to know my brain's a little tired right now. It's Friday, got a little bit of a headache, but the community release that's going on, the bail program too, I think would be great to have some metrics on that in addition. So, yeah, you know, the payroll, not payroll, payroll, the parole, and those sort of things. You know what I mean? Somebody can help me on that. So, so just sort of metrics on that would be great too.
Thank you.
Any new business items? Any new business topics that anyone would like to bring up?
Phil, I
Yes,
have
Mary.
one request, and that is, I wonder if sometime in the future, it doesn't have to be right away, but we can have a short snapshot of mental health services as it relates to those who haven't either self-identified or been diagnosed with a mental health disorder. My experience, so the folks who are depressed or, right, I mean, they don't have a diagnosable mental illness, but they need counseling services. My experience in the past is there was a lot of complaining among inmates that it was hard to see. I don't know if that's true anymore, but I think it would be helpful for us to know what's the process by which either corrections or medical folks identify that somebody might need help, or how easy is it for people to request mental health services. And this is, you know, this is also in light of the fact that we had almost 3 months or maybe more of absolutely no visitors allowed. And my experience sitting with the people in the jail is that it's a very isolating, scary, and lonely place to be, and that some of their lives have been changed overnight. Home, job, kids taken away, and that in and of itself, for me, I don't know how I would do it. So after 3 months of real isolation and separation from their families, I just wondered, it just brought to mind, how is the access for folks who aren't acutely ill, don't take medication necessarily, and at some time going forward, just a short presentation of what does the access look like? How do you even identify? And if so, who's providing the support? How many people are, and what does it look like? That just for the next, it truly is new business for the next time.
Well, Ms. Taylor, what we can do when I'm doing my draft for the dashboard, we can add it because we are tracking how many visits that was scheduled and how many showed up. So that could be a standing dashboard because this way you see the social visit numbers as well.
That would be great. But what I'm really looking for here is telling the story. I want to hear the story of what it's like for an inmate who thinks they need help, and what are the different layers? Is it a CO in the pod? Is it, if they have a CO that they don't, how is it that they express the need? When they express the need, how often does it get past the CO who may not like them or the CO who does like them? That I'm kind of looking for the story as well as the numbers.
Mary, can I ask you, there was some background at the very beginning when you were speaking. Can you please say again what the concern had been that you were hearing, that folks didn't have access, or that?
Yeah. Well, it was people who didn't have access, people who said, I haven't even seen a counselor, or, and this is for some people who came in on meds. Now, I know a lot of that has changed, because you've told us what your intake procedures are and how you're evaluating folks. And I see on the dashboard by the numbers that it probably is a pretty sensitive screening process, because the numbers of people who have a diagnosis is quite high. I'm really just concerned, that's the number, and that's what we say is available. And there's the reality of a particular person who's incarcerated there who may need help, who also, I don't know, with all the mental illness around, maybe they don't feel that they are a priority. But in light of the isolation from their families, it just became more apparent to me that we don't want them to suffer more than they already are.
Thank you for reiterating. Can I also ask under new business if it's possible to launch a subcommittee to look specifically at the staffing challenges that at least I'm having for corrections medicine?
So, yes, sign me up to that subcommittee. And also, Mr. Benasco, I'm interested in serving on the capital improvement subcommittee.
Could somebody reach out to Jeff about staffing? I bet he would be a really good to to add a different perspective on that subcommittee. If somebody could reach out to Jeff, maybe Phil, maybe you can.
I'll follow up, Mary. I'll follow up with Jeff.
Valerie will jointly put out all the subcommittees. We'll work on the charges, and then everyone will have them. And then you can respond.
Back to what Mary just mentioned about identifying those inmates. Director Benasco, is the process when inmates notify a correctional officer, where does it go from there? Does the correctional officer then have to bubble it up, and what's that process look like?
The process should be whenever an inmate is in need of any medical, mental health care, they immediately make contact with the medical and mental health staff. That's the protocol. They document it, and then that's when they either bring the actual patient down to the infirmary, or the medical or mental health staff respond to the housing unit. but there is.
Okay, so let me add on to that scenario. You know, hypothetically, if an inmate does that and it doesn't get passed on, but then the inmate starts to have more issues, and then he tells the second shift, third shift, at some point, I would imagine that this inmate would finally be seen by medical at some point. But is there something in there that will go back to those who possibly did not, in a timely manner, notify medical?
Yes, and we have a procedure, and I can get that for you, but they're required to contact medical, whether
Okay,
it's
that-
correct, one has the obligation, the corrections officer, and now that we have sergeants, and, they communicate that, and for some reason, we are in shift briefing, so they're communicating from one shift to the other. If there is a challenge with an inmate, he might have seen mental health, but he's sort of okay now, they passing that information on to the relieving officer that's taking over, but that is the
Okay.
process that's is
Okay.
expected to take place.
Due to the sickness of time, that's something you and I will continue offline.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Any more comments from the board before we go to, are there any visitor comments?
No, there are not.
Okay, very well. I'd like to ask all the advisory members at this time to please give their closing comments, if you have any.
I will be very, very short. And I just want to say this felt more productive. Thank you.
Thank you, Spring. Ms. Lee. Twyla, are you still there?
Here, I don't have anything to add.
Okay, thank you. Dr. Garza,
He already left.
okay. Dr. McBride,
I agree with Spring. But I think healthy dialogue is important, and hardly it was productive because I think she proposed some motions that I think we're going to act on, and have some. I think transparency is important in reporting, and I want to encourage us to have that transparency in the open and in the public, and I'm still seeking clarity about what our role is as a board, and I hope we get there at some point before I end up not being on this board. I don't know when that's going to be. So it's been, I've got a little bit of clarity today. So, and I appreciate that. Thank you.
thank you. Mary?
I think it was a more productive meeting. I think it only because we do need to be very disciplined with ourselves about not just having a great conversation, but what the heck are we going to do about it? So I remain cautiously optimistic, but as my nature is suspicious, suspicious of too much clarity in such a short period of time. I'm encouraged by the conversation. I look forward to the subcommittee work. And I also wish, Phil, that we would have another conversation about having listening sessions out in the community. I probably should have brought this up during new business. We've talked about it before and we've never done anything about it because all kinds of things happened. But I do think it would be helpful. I mean, we didn't have any community comments today, which just blows my mind. But I don't honestly think people know we exist, and I would like to suggest that we not just talk and, because we all, especially me, love to talk at these meetings, but listen, open our ears and listen to the community, because that's who we represent, nobody else.
Reverend?
Yes, thank you.
One last thing, we forgot to, if you could approve the minutes from the last meeting.
I'd like to put forth a motion that we approve the minutes from June 2020.
From the open session, is that right?
Correct, I'm sorry.
Second.
Ready for the vote? Roll call, please.
Reverend Duvall,
Yes.
Dr. Garza, Ms. Taylor,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Yes.
Dr. Smith, Ms. Lee,
Yes.
Ms. Schmidt,
Yes.
Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
Anything else before I make my closing comments?
Can we set the next meeting, which is, it looks like it's gonna be August 28th? Or at the same time, 9 o'clock, that's Friday of August?
Yes. The next board meeting will be set on August 28th, 2020 at 9 a.m.
Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I want to congratulate my board members. Mary mentioned it at the beginning. This is our year anniversary. So for 12 months, we have tried our best to be productive. We have had some ups and downs. But I also want to mention that Valerie, who's only been with us 10 months, correct, Valerie?
Almost 9. I lost track.
Okay. And Benasco, director is right behind that. He came to us in November. Now, why I make mention of this is in our first meeting a year ago, all of us on the board, as we introduced ourselves to one another and to those who appointed us, is that we believe strongly in transparency and accountability. And like my colleagues, I feel better today that we're making progress with transparency. And Spring, thank you for putting those out there, because action plans and follow-up and Director, your comments about the subcommittees, those show and demonstrate transparency efforts. The accountability, I suspect that what I'm hearing that goes on in that facility is not driven by you, Valerie, or you, Director Benasco, because you inherited this culture. I counted 8 times from different persons, Spring, Director Benasco, and I even heard Jeff Smith. 8 or 9 times that word culture came up. Some are offended to talk about culture. We can name it whatever we want. A toxic environment, a historical. We are committed as a team, as a board, to support you, Valerie, and support you, Director Benasco, because you are not driving that culture. You're trying to correct that culture. As we keep this partnership of doing the business for the citizens and for the staff and for the inmates, it's a collective effort that's the only way we're going to be able to correct the culture and hold people accountable for it. So as it is continued to drive, please note that we appreciate your strong efforts, especially under these the circumstances of COVID has caused your work to be even harder. And I know how much time the two of you and some of your staff members are actually spending a lot of hours in there with COVID. That's the reality. But I want to tell you, I believe that you were equally tasked under these circumstances that you have taken on, that is just as challenging to you when trying to turn this ship around. So I want to ask my board members to continue to reach out on your own. Now, the director and I have to talk more than we want to talk. Nothing against you, Director. Okay? But I want to encourage my board members to reach out to Valerie, to reach out to Director Benasco, and help them turn this culture around. Otherwise, those of us who want to stick around on this board are going to find ourselves still scratching our head, not being able to turn this huge ship around. I'm committed to help you. And I'll say, Mr. Capizzi, I respect your office. I've not met you personally, but you need to know from my mouth to your ears that I'm not filling the county counselor's office on these efforts of accountability and culture. I know it is your duty to defend the county. It is your duty to defend what goes on. But I'm telling you, from my perspective, I'm not with the plan of action of blocking us, of not allowing us to access things. Because there are people in the building now that are talking, and we're gonna connect the dots. And Director Benasco, I'll share those things with you because it's about changing the culture, not letting it perpetuate. So I'm off my soapbox now. I hope everyone stays and remains safe. I'd like a motion to close this meeting.
So moved.
Second.
Reverend Duvall,
Yes.
Dr. Garza, Ms. Taylor,
Yes.
Dr. McBride,
Amen. So, yeah. Sorry, I had to do that.
Ms. Lee,
Yes.
Ms. Schmidt,
Yes.
Thank you, everybody. We'll see you next month.
Stay healthy, everybody.
Oh, yes, please do.
Thanks. Yeah.